This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends Library. The date is November 17th, 1969, which is the date of the Oklahoma Hall of Fame dinner. We are visiting with Mr. Joseph Horace Benton from Norman, Oklahoma. Mr. Benton, I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about your parentage and early life.
Yes, my parents were originally Missourians, and they became transplanted Okies. My father was in lumber business in Kansas City, where he and my mother, who was Miss Sewell, were married in 1893. And fortune smiled on the business, and it became quite important also as a wholesale lumber store. But my father overworked his health and had a complete nervous breakdown and was sent to the wilds of the West to work in the sun and hopefully to get back his health. He got it back fairly well, except for his hearing. He never heard well.
Could you tell us a little about the area that you grew up in and the environment of this place?
Yes, my parents, in those days, the only way to get to Oklahoma with furniture was by freight car. And my father rented or leased 3 big empty freight cars on the Choctaw Railway. Today it's the Rock Island. And they came as far as the train went, as far as the rails had been laid, which was El Reno, where they waited 3 weeks for it to finish to Weatherford. And then from Weatherford on west, they took in 3 covered wagons. They pressed on westward, and the husband of one of my mother's nieces was conversant with the early days of the state, and he rode a horse ahead of the little caravan of 3 covered wagons to head the canyons so that the wheels wouldn't break under the stress of going down into the canyon to cross it. In those days, there were no roads. There wasn't even a marker. My parents finally stopped at a little place where the railroad had intended to make a division point. That is, they were building then the depot, and the town was called Riverton. Today it's Sayre. Right across the North Fork of Red River at that time was Greer County, and that was Texas. And there was the usual friction between 2 states, not knowing whose that county belonged to, whose authority was law. Both fought. And I can remember one night there were 5 murders in a saloon. Of course, that was many years after my parents first went there. In all this hubbub, one of the first white women out there was my mother. And I can well remember the Cheyenne Indians and a few Apaches coming to our place to see my mother because she had a fair skin. I can remember that, and also playing with buffalo skulls in the buffalo wallows. Those were very wild days.
Could you tell us about your education and possibly a little description of the school where you attended?
Yes, my father was a believer in very fine schools, and believe it or not, we had a good school out there. So good, in fact, that 3 years after its inception, it was accredited with the National Society of High Schools, Class A high schools. My parents had 2 other sons, and they both died young. So it was up to me to do the family honors. So to keep me straight, they moved with me to the State University at Norman. And I graduated there with 3 degrees. And let's see, 1920 was the Bachelor of Arts degree. The Bachelor of Music's degree in voice was in 1921. And the Master's degree of Modern Languages was in 1941. And then from there I went to Chicago and later to New York and later to France and then to Italy. And I was over there for 11 and a half years, working all the time.
Could you describe the university at the time you were there?
It was a joke. There were 3 buildings. Well, there was I guess you could call it 4 because the 4th one was the old gymnasium. And it was a mess. Standing today, there are the original 3. The administration building was brand new. I was a freshman in 1916, and this administration building had been built in 1950. Its neighbors across the campus were the old Science Hall and the Carnegie Library. And they both stand today, alive with rats and all sorts of troubles. Sometimes we wish they weren't there. But before we knew it, a building boom started, and since then it's only a matter of history.
Tell us about your early years out after you got out of the university.
The first years were spent in Chicago, summer times especially. Later in music you have to get to New York whether you like it or not. I didn't like it, so I went to France. And I was there with Jean Doroschky until his death. In fact, it so happened that I took the last lesson he ever gave. And then later went to Italy. One never knew, because of Doroschky's great background and his gregarious kindness, he loved to have people in the studio. So one never knew, going to a lesson, whether he was going to meet the King of Siam or the janitor. But it's most wonderful, the people that we met there. For example, I went out there one day and there was a very strange but handsome woman who addressed me in the most flawless of English. And when presented to her later on, if you please, I found out she was the Princess Danilova of Russia, who was a second cousin of the Tsar. Doroschky, being Polish himself, naturally had a flair for things Slavic. However, his wife, Madame Doroschky, was a great niece by marriage of Napoleon. Now that may require some clarification. Napoleon's first wife was Josephine de Beauharnais, and she had been married before, and her husband was the great uncle of the lady who was Madame Doroschky. After another time, we met the Duke of Connaught, who was the nephew, who was the uncle of the then ruling king of England. And people like John McCormick and Fritz Kreisler and down the list, Rachmaninoff. So, as at Oki, it was a very rich experience.
You were telling us whom you met while you were over there. Could you tell us a little about your own career while you were there, where you may have appeared and the type of work that you did, the type of music that you did?
Well, how far is up? Because of good health and hard work, it was possible to be over there 11 and a half years, doing 512, to be exact, performances of 68 different operas. It was my profession and my love, and still is my love. The first performances were in France under the Doroschky aegis, and it all went very well. We had all sorts of accolades. The debut was in Nice, and then later on we went to Cannes and Cagnes and Lyon and Lille and Paris and Dinard, all over every place. Then Durushka died very suddenly. Just in a week he was dead. And there was no one else there except Edmond Clément, with whom I did some work until his wife said it was time to go to Aix-les-Bains for the summer. And since she controlled the purse strings, he said, "Oui, madame," and away he went. So I went to Italy. I didn't know any more Italian than I knew Arabic, but I learned it, and about 4 years later began working there, and I was there straight through for 9.5 years, doing all of the big theaters without exception, and also with Italian opera companies in Egypt and Libya and Budapest and Holland and Switzerland and Belgium and, well, just name it. It was a great experience.
Could you tell us about your return to the United States and to Oklahoma, and subsequently about your career at the university?
Well, my return home was rather precipitated. I had signed with Dean Lukin of the University of Tulsa to do Elijah, Mendelssohn's great oratorio, in the end of May. In the first part of May, I received word from my mother that my father was very ill and I should come home. So I came instantly. And it was a protracted, very long illness. And I could not go back and leave him in the conditions that he had to be turned in bed every 3 hours. Just couldn't do it. So I stayed home. However, I was all booked up for return engagements in Rome and Budapest and Bern and so on. So I had to wait until I could to go back. I did go back, but it was only to bring home all of my belongings. In the meantime, my father had passed on and my mother was ill. So I was doubly handicapped in the career line. So rather than pull against the goads that hurt, I just put a finis on my professional work and began teaching at the university, because I could be with my sick people at night and still earn something during the day. And of course it takes a lot of money to support a long illness. So I went on to the faculty. Of course, before going ever to Europe, I'd had 4 years of work, of teaching at the university as a student assistant and 1 year as an instructor. I could even vote in faculty meeting, and that was something great in those days. So I went in as full professor on the first day of September 1944. And I was there straight through summer and winter, especially winter, until last June 1st, when, having passed the mandatory age for retirement, I retired.
Could you tell us something about some of the students you may have had at the university who have made careers in the field of music?
Well, calling names is always difficult and dangerous. But I have had, by absolute statistics, which I detest, I have had 704 students, private students, in 28 years. Of that number, 3 have become nationally known, and 1 has become internationally known. But, and then many others have done very well. I have right now, for example, on 2 baritones doing beautifully in off-Broadway musicals. But as to names, it's best not to call them. They'll sound very funny in the years to come.
Mr. Benton, why don't you discuss the development of the music department in Oklahoma University over the years and the state itself?
Well, the term, as we all know, of Okie has been looked at with some crooked eyebrows until recent times, when I see all sorts of pins, people wearing pins, and it says Okie, Okie, Okie. Well, I'd wear one too if I had one, especially if I had one in Grammys. No, seriously, we have come a long way. We have a long way to go. But musically, we have worked wonders, absolute miracles, with public instruction. It isn't that so-and-so makes the Metropolitan Opera. It's just so that so-and-so has enriched his community and his family and his life through having brushed shoulders with somebody or something that is beyond him in appreciation. The best way to sharpen a butcher knife is to rub it against something harder than it is. So I often think in years past, we would have these fine young people come down to Norman, to the OU Music School, hundreds of them. And I mean hundreds of them. And I used to wonder, is it worthwhile to try to teach these young people anything? First of all, they know it all. So if I try to teach them something when they know it all anyhow. But they admit sometimes, having flunked, that they don't know music. Well, I have come to this conclusion. It isn't who stars, it's who appreciates. That'll be $10. That's worth it.
Mr. Benton, I wonder if you could discuss a little bit the development of musical organizations in Oklahoma and how they have come along.
Well, years ago, in 1916 to be exact, when I was a freshman at OU, I was not in the School of Music. I went to OU to become a pre-medic student, and I did. But since such work towards a bachelor's degree is the kind that allows for electives, I took out all my electives in the School of Music, counterpoint, sight singing, solfeggio, orchestration, and so on. It counted in both schools. Result being that when I got my BA degree with a major in Spanish, it was easy enough with one more year and 2 summer schools to get a voice degree, which I did. During those years, the head of the department and the head of the whole College of Music was Dean Frederick Holmberg, who was the native of Sweden and who spoke English very well, but with a heavy accent naturally, like all of us when we speak somebody else's language, if we dare do it. And he had organized a very good orchestra at the university, of course, of students. He had some very excellent talent. The last year that I was there, which was 1923, he organized what has become the Oklahoma City Symphony. And no one who was locally important had ever even heard one out here. There hadn't been one until he organized one with the basis, the background of some of the students at OU and some lawyers and doctors and what have you up here who gave up their time to practice. And he whipped together a very good orchestra, really excellent. The year that I came back from Europe, which was 1929, he asked me to appear as soloist with his group, and I did. And I was simply charmed with the the improvement that in their playing. It was really professional. So Dean Holmberg is the man to whom thanks and appreciation are due for having organized the first group that has become the Oklahoma City Symphony. Now, Oklahoma City is a nice town and all that, but the tail can't wag the dog. There are other places too. For example, Tulsa. I know, there's lots of rivalry and all that, but they also have a very fine background of talent over there. Dean Lucan, for example, has done marvelous things. By the way, I had lunch with him and his wife and their daughter-in-law 2 nights ago in Norman. He has dedicated his life to the good of music in Tulsa. And in 1929, the beginning of the Depression years, he wanted to give in Skelly Stadium an all-Oklahoma cast of I Pagliacci. And he had everybody except the tenor. Well, of course, now we must remember that the tenor part in Pagliacci, Cagno, is a dramatic tenor. He wrote to me and he said, I want you for my Cagno. I wrote back, thank you kindly, but I'm a lyric and I can't do it. I can clarify as a side issue, voices are something like boxers. You wouldn't expect a medium-weight boxer to climb into the ring to fight a heavyweight. And you wouldn't expect a lyric tenor to climb into the opera ring to attack a dramatic tenor role. However, I realize that not everyone would know the difference between a lyric and a dramatic. So as a mark of patriotism, and I can truly say that word rightly, as a mark of patriotism, I wired back, yes, I'll do it. Believe it or not, I still have the $50 he gave me. It's a kind of pillow in case of necessity. It's bad money. It's in my money belt. And it was a great success, if I may say so. 3 performances out of doors. And the other members of the cast were just excellent, excellent. So, with their orchestra to conduct and the all-Oklahoma cast to sing, it was quite an evening.